What's up, LEGO fans? Welcome back, Alex here. In this video, I will be scoring these 16 LEGO modulars to see which one is the absolute best. And to do that, I'm using a scoring system based off 5 unique categories. Each category gets a score of 1 through 10, 10 being the best. Now, I will say when I'm doing the scoring, if it gets a 5, well, that means it meets the expectation. It's not a bad score. So yeah, that means that if a modular has a 25 out of 50, it's a good set. It met the expectation perfectly, no more, no less. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the categories. The first one we have is value. And that means to say that if I spend $100 on a Lego set, am I getting $100 worth of value out of it? And if the answer is yes, well, then it gets a 5 out of 10. The next category is exterior. And this is just going to be the curb appeal of the set. Next category you have is interior. And that's just the effort that Lego has put into the inside of the structure. The next category is playability, and that just means to say how much fun can you have playing with this thing just by itself. And a lot of that has to do with how much my kids play with this thing after I'm done building it. And then the final category we have is minifigures. Now, this has a lot to do, obviously, with the quantity of minifigures. That's going to be the biggest factor. But beyond that, it's the diversity of the minifigures, the reversible faces, unique prints, things of that nature will help the score there. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to go off of the assumption that these are still available from the Lego group, and I just bought them in the year that they were released. I'm going to do my best to do that way. So let's go back in time to 2007, and let's go ahead and start with Cafe Corner. This is what started it all. Cafe Corner, set 101A2, released in 2007, has 2,056 pieces and retailed for 140 US dollars. We'll start with value. I think this thing is right on the money for what I paid for it, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Exterior wise, I think this thing shines really well for what you get, so it gets a 7 out of 10. Interior wise, not much of an interior to speak of, actually, unless you count the stairs, so it gets a 2 out of 10. Playability, not a lot of fun things to do with this thing. It's kind of a standalone Lego set, fun to look at, but that's really about it. And it gets a 2 out of 10. Minifigures, I think it suffers a little bit just as a baseline, so you guys know as we move on to these other Lego sets, is that with the modulars, you get about a little over 3 minifigures per $100 spent. I think it's like 3.1 minifigures. So this, you get 3 minifigures with it, so it suffers a little bit already with the quantity, and they're pretty plain to boot. So it gets a 3 out of 10, giving Cafe Corner a total score of 19 out of 50. Next on the list is Market Street, set number 10190, also came out in 2007, has 1,248 pieces, and retail for just 90 US dollars, making it the cheapest Lego modular to date. So the category of value, for me, it's got good value, a little bit more than expected, honestly, with that price tag. So I give it a 6 out of 10. Exterior wise, this thing fits the bill just fine for me. It looks good. It's a 5 out of 10. Interior, though, is where this thing is going to struggle for me. There's no interior, first of all, and it's also very difficult to put a custom interior in because of the way the stairway is. It's aligned in the middle of it. The only reason I actually gave this as a 2 out of 10, but it avoided the horrid score of 1 because it has these little walkout balconies. So that gave it a 2 out of 10 for me. Playability on this thing is real. There's not a lot going on. It does suffer quite a bit in my experience, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Minifigures, though, I think this thing does quite well for 3 minifigures. They're not really amazing minifigures. They're pretty run of the mill, but it does meet the quantity pretty well for the price. So I give it a 5 out of 10, giving Market Street a score of 21 out of 50. Next up is Green Grocer, set 10185, came out in 2008, has 2,352 pieces, and retailed for 150 US dollars. When we look at the value of this thing, I think there's great value here because for what you get, the amount of Lego pieces and size of this thing, $150 is a bargain, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. Exterior, this is a very large looking modular, and I love the very dominating appearance it has from the front. Those bay windows look fantastic, and it also raised the bar for what to expect in the back end of these modulars as well. So it gets a high score of 7 out of 10 on the exterior. Interior wise, it's okay. It meets the expectation. I gave it a 5 out of 10. Just has the furnished main floor basically on that. Playability with this is okay as well. I gave it a 5 out of 10. Minifigures is where it struggles a little bit. It just comes with 4 minifigures. I think it should have come at least with 1 more. So it gets a 3 out of 10 on the minifigures. And all in all, it gets a score of 27. So it beats out that mid-range 25 for the first time. Number 5 is the Fire Brigade. This is set 10197, came out in 2009. 2,231 pieces with this set, retailed for 150 US dollars. Now, for me, this is actually pretty good value for what you get. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Exterior, I think this is where it really shines. This is one of my more favorite exteriors on this thing. Has great curb appeal. I love that red brick on that second level, and even the back of this thing looks pretty good as well. And this gets a pretty darn high score of 8 out of 10. But we go to interior, and that's where it struggles a little bit for me. I know it's a fire brigade, but I feel like the upper level should have had maybe some living quarters for the firemen. So I ended up giving this a 3 out of 10. Playability, though, is pretty high with this thing because, well, it's a fire station, right? It has a fire truck. You can open up the doors. It goes in and out. You can play around with the minifigures inside. There's a pole they can go up, that they can slide down on when they're called. So a lot of great playability with this. So it does get a 7 out of 10 from me. But minifigures on this thing, it does struggle a little bit. It has just 4 minifigures. I would have loved to see 6 minifigures with this. Maybe one extra civilian along with another fireman would have been nice. So this does get a 3 out of 10 on minifigures, but it does have a decent score with all those added up together of 27 out of 50. So far, Fire Brigade and Green Grocer are the mark. Next up is Grand Emporium, set 10211. Came out in 2010. This set contains 2,182 pieces. It retailed for 150 US dollars. Now, for me on the value score, it's going to be okay, but it doesn't really meet my expectations for what I got with my money. So I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Exterior wise, usually corner buildings do very well because they can add a lot more aesthetics to it. But for me, it missed the mark because of the repetition between the second and third level. And I also feel like you have to buy at least 2 of these for it to actually look good. So I gave it a 4 out of 10 on the exterior. Interior wise, I think it suffers even more than the exterior. I know it has a lot of stuff that you can buy inside of it, but I feel like they could have put a lot more detail and effort into things, for example, like the changing rooms. So it gets a 3 out of 10 for me on the interior. Now, the playability on this thing also is going to be a little bit less than average. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. The last one is minifigures. I think that's its best feature. It comes with 7 minifigures, 2 of which are mannequins, so that kind of beefs up that minifigure count, which is nice. Giving it a final score of 21 out of 50. Next up is Pet Shop. This is set 10218, came out in 2011, and contains 2,032 pieces, retails for 150 US dollars, the 4th modular in a row to retail for that price. So let's take a look at the value. I think looking at this set as a whole for $150, I think you get what you pay for, and I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Exterior wise on this thing, one of my favorite thing about Pet Shop is probably that it's basically 2 buildings in one, and you can separate these two, the apartment building from the pet shop. So there's some versatility there that I love. So it gets a 5 out of 10. Next up is interior. Not a lot to speak of on the interior. I mean, it's pretty basic. There's the most detail on the pet shop, obviously. So it gets a 5 out of 10. Playability on this thing is a little less than average for me. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. There's not a lot to do unless you're living next door and you go next door and you buy a pet. And then our last category is minifigures. You get 4 minifigures at the pet shop. For me, that just seems a little low, and I'm saying that a lot for these modulars, but I think you should have at least 1, maybe even 2 more. So I'm giving this a 4 out of 10, giving Pet Shop a final score of 23 out of 50. Not bad. Next up is Town Hall, set 10224. This came out in 2012, has 2,766 pieces, and retails for 200 US dollars. So this is the biggest, most expensive Lego modular that we had to this point. So what are you getting for your extra money? Well, this set, I really think there's value in it. Even though it's more expensive, it is a fantastic set. It's very big, and for me, it gets a 6 out of 10. If it was a little cheaper, I'd give it a higher score, but with that price point, I can't give it a higher score than a 6. Now, looking at the exterior, for me, that's where this puppy shines. Now, I know I gave Grand Emporium some grief about having the same color scheme on the second and third floor. This does too. Granted that it does, but look how tall this thing is. It is I think it's the tallest modular that we still have to date. That awesome looking clock tower is just fun to look at. I love those bay windows at the very top, and the grand entrance. These steps up to the main entrance in the middle and those massive white pillars just make this thing really easy to look at. And it's always kind of the centerpiece of the modulars that I put in my city. So for me, this gets an 8 out of 10 on the exterior. However, on the interior, it's not so awesome. It's a big set. There's a lot of stuff that you'd have to fill in this thing. I think they do okay for it. But for me, it kind of missed the mark a little bit. And I gave it a 4 out of 10. Now, playability, I think with this thing, I don't know. I think its best interior feature or playable feature is the elevator. And I think when kids would play with this, they would have fun moving the elevator up and down, and then they would get bored with it. So for me, the playability gets a 5 out of 10. And lastly, minifigures. This actually has 8 minifigures, which beats the average of 3.1 per $100 spent. And beyond having a decent minifigure count, they're pretty diverse as well. You have a couple of little kids, a couple who wants to get married, a photographer, etc. So I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 on the minifigure score, which gives it a total score of 31 out of 50. So far, this has our high score. Next up is Palace Cinema, set 10232. This came out in 2013, has 2,196 pieces, and retail for 150 US dollars. This is the last modular that we saw at this price point. Ever since then, they've been more expensive. So let's take a look at the value here. For this, for your $150, I think you get what you pay for it. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Exterior wise, this thing looks fantastic. It's very reminiscent of Grauman's Chinese Theater, I think, out in Hollywood. It looks fantastic. I love that massive marquee out in front of it. So this thing really shines in this category. So I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Next up is the interior, and for me, this is just a really big disappointment. I think they kind of cheated a little bit with using a red base plate, so they didn't have to put a floor in on the main floor. There's only two floors, and I think even the upper floor, which is the movie theater, they could have done a better job of, I don't know, covering up the camera. But anyway, it gets a 2 out of 10 for me in that category. Playability is okay. I think what saves this thing is that it actually comes with a vehicle. It has a limo that brings the stars to watch the premiere of an event. So it gets a 5 out of 10 for me on that. And lastly, minifigures. Comes with 6 minifigures, which is actually pretty decent. And they're pretty cool looking minifigures as well. So this scores pretty well in this category. I give it a 7 out of 10, giving this a 26 out of 50. So definitely a good buy if you were able to get that at the time, especially for that price. Next up is the Parisian Restaurant, set 10243. Came out in 2014, has 2,469 pieces, and retail for 160 US dollars. So, what are we getting for our little extra money here on this thing? Well, for me, I think this thing has tremendous value, and I'm giving this thing a 7 out of 10. Next up is the exterior. I think this thing looks fantastic, has great curb appeal, can also double as a corner building if you need it, or at the end of a row of modulars. It looks really good on that kind of placement as well. So I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Interior, it also shines. It has a great upscale restaurant, and that open kitchen looks great. The upper two levels look fantastic as well, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Playability is probably where I think it suffers the most for me anyway, and it gets a 4 out of 10. And lastly, we have minifigures. Has 5 minifigures, and you kind of get what you expect with this particular set. So for me, it meets the expectation of minifigures, and I give it a 5 out of 10, giving this a total score of 28 out of 50. So the Parisian Restaurant is definitely a force to be reckoned with. Detective's Office is next at 10246. Came out in 2015, 2,262 pieces. Retail for 160 US dollars. Now, for this thing on value, I think this thing edges out just the average. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Exterior wise, I think this thing shines really well. It's very unique, very different than its predecessors. So I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 there. Interior wise, well, this thing is loaded with goodies. Not a lot of interior space, but I love the billiards room. I love the barber shop. This thing is getting a 7 out of 10 on the interior. Playability, some pretty decent playability here, kind of going on the lines of Prohibition here, where they're sneaking sweets through the walls, and the detective is trying to figure out what's going on. So I'm giving this a 6 out of 10 on the playability scale. Now, minifigures, this has 6 minifigures, which is a little bit better than your average. Now, the minifigures' faces are pretty plain, but I do like all the clothing prints, and there's some pretty good diversity among the minifigures as well. So it gets a 6 out of 10, giving this thing a really good score of 32 out of 50. We move on now to Brick Bank. This is set 10251. Came out in 2016, has 2,380 pieces, and retail for 170 US dollars. Now, for me, this thing has great value. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10 there. Exterior wise, not a tall modular, but I think it has a very nice modern look to it. And I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Interior wise, I think this thing shines on the interior. Not a lot of space. Well, it's just a two-story building, but man, the lobby is beautiful. So I'm giving this thing a 7 out of 10. Playability with this thing is also going to be a little bit better than average. They've got the laundromat next door, kind of adding to the joke of money laundering. And obviously, there is a way for you to break into the vault and steal money. So this creates a lot of fun playability. So it gets a 7 out of 10 there. Minifigures does struggle a little bit, just 5 with this thing, and I'm giving it a 4 out of 10, giving Brickbank a pretty decent score of 30 out of 50. Assembly Square. This is set 10255. Came out in 2017. Boasts 4,002 pieces and retailed for 280 US dollars, making it by far the biggest and most expensive Lego modular to date. But despite its high price tag, I still think there's great value here. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Exterior wise, well, this thing really shines in that category. It's really its own little city. And I love how the building styles and colors kind of give shout outs to modulars of old. So I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Interior wise, well, this thing's full of small businesses as well as a residence. Some are more full of details than others, but it still ranks pretty well, and I give it a 7 out of 10. Playability is there. You can have a lot of fun with this thing. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. But minifigures is kind of on par. I wish there were more. There's only 9 in this Lego set. But I still think with how much you're paying, you should have got maybe 11, maybe even 12. But it meets the mark as far as kind of the average that we've seen. So I give it a 5 out of 10 there, giving it a total score of 33 out of 50. So this takes the top spot at the moment. Next up is Downtown Diner, set 10260. Came out 2018 with 2,480 pieces and retailed for 170 US dollars. So, the category of value, I think this meets the expectation. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Exterior wise, this has great curb appeal to me, so it gets a 6 out of 10. Interior wise, well, it's interesting choices on the interior. Obviously, there's a diner, you have a gym, and then a recording studio above it. So it gets a 5 out of 10 for interior. Playability, this thing has great playability. The pink car adds a lot of that, as well as the gym. I think the boxing ring is a great addition to this, so it gets a 7 out of 10 for me there. Minifigures, this has 6 minifigures, which exceeded the quantity that we typically see in this price range. They're also great, versatile minifigures as well. So I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 on minifigures, giving it a total score of 30 out of 50. Next up is Corner Garage. This is set 10264. Came out 2019, has 2,569 pieces, and retail for 200 US dollars. Now, when we talk about value, and I said this in my review of this set as well, is I think it's a little overpriced. I think it should be a $180 set. So on the value, I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Exterior wise, I think it's a fantastic looking set. It definitely has curb appeal, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Interior wise, this thing is a lot of fun on the interior. I love the vet clinic and I love the residence on the upper 2 levels there, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Playability, well, this thing has great playability. I mean, it has a garage, it has a gas station, it has a tow truck as well. And I love that it has that vet clinic on that middle level there. So, playability, it gets an 8 out of 10 from me. And last up is minifigures. You get 6 minifigures with this. They're good looking minifigures. For me, it does well, and it gets a 5 out of 10, giving it a total score of 29 out of 50. Move on to Bookshop. This is set 10270. Came out in 2020, has 2,504 pieces, retailed for 180 US dollars. I think for the value, you get what you pay for, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Exterior wise, this thing suffers for me a little bit because, well, I like the way that the bookshop looks, but the other building, the teal color, the shorter height of it, kind of bugged me a little bit, and I'm giving it a 3 out of 10. Interior wise, I think this is just fine. It gets a 5 out of 10. Playability, though, not a lot of playability with this. I kind of feel like they forced some playability with this little kid getting his airplane stuck in the tree. So for me, it gets a 3 out of 10. Minifigures, though, it has 5 minifigures, and I really like the minifigures. So for me, it meets the mark, and it gets a 5 out of 10, giving Bookshop a score of 21 out of 50. And finally, we have Police Station, set 10278. Came out in 2021, has 2,923 pieces, and retails for 200 US dollars. Now, I actually already gave this thing an Alex score in my review of it, but as a recap, I'll give those again. Value, I gave it a 6 out of 10. Exterior, it gets a 7 out of 10. Interior gets a 5. Playability gets a 4. Minifigures also gets a 4, giving Police Station a final score of 26 out of 50. With the Alex score now complete with all the modulars, let's see how these things stack up. Let's take a look at worst to first scores. At the very bottom, we're going to start out with Cafe Corner. Cafe Corner is at the bottom. It got a 19 out of 50. It's interesting because that's actually my favorite modular from my ranking last year. Well, what a swap. Oh, anyway. All right, so next up is a three-way tie with in 13th place. It's Market Street, Grand Emporium, and Bookshop, each of those getting a 21 out of 50. Alone in 12th place is Pet Shop. That got a 23 out of 50. Tied in 10th place is Palace Cinema and Police Station. Those got the 26 out of 50. Tied in 8th place is Green Grocer and Fire Brigade. They got a 27 out of 50. All Alone in 7th place is Parisian Restaurant. That got a 28 out of 50. And Corner Garage got the 6th place position at 29 out of 50. Tied in 4th place was Brick Bank and Downtown Diner. Those got 30 out of 50. Now, Brick Bank was a big swap. That was my 13th favorite modular. So obviously now that did a lot better with the Alex score. All right, 3rd place. This is the bronze medal, guys, top 3. Town Hall got a 31 out of 50, and it gets that 3rd place position. It's actually my 2nd favorite, so at least that's somewhat consistent. In 2nd place, Detective's Office got a 32 out of 50. Interesting. That was my 8th favorite from last year's rankings. But from the Alex score, it gets 2nd place. And of course, in 1st place is Assembly Square. That got a 33 out of 50. And it is All Alone there in 1st place. So that was actually my 3rd favorite from last year's, but it takes the 1st spot. So there it is, guys, the Alex score. And of course, I love looking at numbers. When we look at the average of each of these categories for all of these, the value, I gave them all a 5.6 on average. So obviously there's some value there for me in buying these modulars. Exterior, I think, is the highest score I gave these things. It's a 6.3 for all. So obviously I'm buying these for their looks. Interior wise, though, I gave them a sub 5 score. It's a 4.6. So obviously I'm not too thrilled about interiors, apparently. But playability is a 5.1. So that kind of always meets the expectation, it seems. And minifigures gets an even 5 average score for all of them, which is interesting because when you spend, if let's say you buy all of the modulars for their MSRP, you're going to spend about $2,700 US, but you only get 86 minifigures. That's a pathetically low number. So you kind of lower your expectations basically with minifigures, but all of them together get a 26.5 score. So basically, I'm getting value, and they're always exceeding my expectation, generally speaking, when I buy a modular. So there you have it, guys. There's the Alex score ranking of all modulars. Now you know. And thanks for watching. This is kind of a long video. Kind of fun to actually have these all ranked for once in a more objective approach. But it's still an Alex score. It could be, your scores could be very, very different. But one thing's for sure, it's very different from my rankings that I had last year. Anyway, guys, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll have some more fun stuff here for you again in the very near future. As always, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.